Welcome to today's webinar, Trends in Philanthropy Tech, Findings from the 2022 Survey of Grantmakers. We will begin shortly. A few housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any technical issues, please feel free to reach out and we will be happy to assist you. For automated live transcript, please click at the bottom of your screen and select Show Subtitles or View Full Transcript. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared alongside resources throughout today's event. And finally, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to include those in the chat along today's event. At this time, I will hand it over to Wendy.
Good afternoon. My name is Wendy Torrance. I'm Director of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships at the Council. I'm really pleased to welcome you to today's webinar. The Technology Association of Grantmakers, TAG, serves as the voice of technology and philanthropy. The importance of technology to philanthropy was brought into high relief during the pandemic, and its importance ranges from where we do our work to how we do it and the ways in which we support nonprofits. The Technology Association of Grantmakers provides our sector with important insights related to the strategic, innovative, and equitable use of technology. The Council is grateful to TAG for its leadership in advancing the sector. I'm honored to introduce our speakers today, Chantal Forrester and Tess Hanrahan. Tess is a senior information technology analyst at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. She manages and executes technology-related projects across the organization and provides end-user technology support using her deep understanding of the Foundation's business and technology needs. She serves as a program officer for the IT department's grant-making portfolio and has been an active member of TAG for several years, where she has served on their committees. Chantal leads the Technology Association of Grantmakers as its executive director. For over 20 years, Chantal has worked across private, public, and social sectors to advance collaboration and impact. Appointed to her role with TAG in 2018, Chantal has become a voice for philanthropic investment in digital infrastructure and an advocate for centering the work of philanthropy on the grantee experience. Chantal and Tess join us today to share important insights from TAG's newest review of the state of technology in philanthropy. I invite you to offer a warm virtual welcome to Tess and Chantal. Chantal, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us. It's not often we get to geek out with peers in philanthropy about such broad trends. So I'm delighted to share with you what we have learned over the past several months from grantmakers throughout North America, the EU, and the UK. So with me today, as you heard, is Tess, who served on our survey committee. Also did some of the qualitative analysis of the results that you will see and hear today. So we're going to dive right in. Before we do, actually, I want to share something in case you missed it. There is, as many of you know, a broad movement, broadly accepted, to move toward a more trust-based approach to philanthropy. And so I just want to share something that TAG just published about 2 weeks ago that might be helpful for you if you're someone who stewards or partners with technology. This particular guide might be very relevant for you. We often talk about trust-based philanthropy, but we don't get down to the nitty-gritty about what that looks like in your grant-making systems. And so you'll find this particular guide very helpful, or maybe something to share with a peer who does own this function in your organization. As I noted, this work was led last year by the following folks, members of our survey committee, led by Chris Lecorn of the Bezos Earth Fund, of course, Tess, and a few other members who steward this survey. TAG conducts the State of Philanthropy Tech survey every 2 years. We have grantmakers throughout North America, the EU, and the UK who respond. About 380 foundations responded to the most recent survey. And we published these findings in November. So we're delighted to share them with you here. They're also available online, and I'll share that link in the chat with you. But to ground ourselves in who participates in this survey, I want to share trends around our respondents by organization type. So here you can see the growth in response rate since 2016, when we started the survey in its current format. You can see that many of our respondents are either community foundations, independent private foundations, with a third bucket of family foundations. And several other buckets here as well. We're seeing a growing response from corporate grant makers, public government grant makers for the first time included this year, but the bulk of responses come from community, family, and private foundations. By asset size, also an important way to look at these findings. We could play a fun game if you wanted, and you could blindfold me, tell me your organization's asset size and the type of organization that you are, and I could probably rattle off your workplace policies, your types of systems that you're using in a variety of areas, so on and so forth. This is one of the strongest predictors of behavior when it comes to philanthropy technology, your asset size. So this will come up again and again in these findings. Tess and I will segment these findings by asset size often, as this allows you to see yourself and your practices in the results that we'll share. So you, again, will see small and large, a bimodal distribution here of small, very small, and very large grant makers in this response set. So that was who responded. Here's where we're going to go next in terms of flying over key trends from the survey. We're going to talk about workplace models, changing behaviors to respond to the crisis, things like streamlining reports. Did those stick? Do we continue to do that good stuff? Number 3, we'll take a look at cybersecurity breaches, what we know about that. Number 4, Tess is going to talk about staffing trends. And then Tess will also talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, specifically on the tech ops side of the house. Are those folks being included to the same degree as programs folks? And then lastly, we will get to some bread and butter slides around which grants management system people are using, which CRM system, so on and so forth. There'll be a lot of data here. So I encourage you to ask questions in chat as we're going. I've got that chat window up right here, so does Tess. And we're happy to answer questions in chat, or I can verbalize them if I catch your note in time. So anytime, reach out and chat and ask a question or share an idea. And we will also share this deck afterwards with you as a PDF. So you don't need to scramble and take screenshots of everything or write down what you hear. You will get a copy of that afterwards. All right, Tess, are we ready? Okay, let's dive in. Go back a few years, 3 years ago, and think about the person in your org who wanted to work remotely. And your organizational policies at the time, like many grant makers, required folks in the office. We had no way of anticipating that such a dramatic shift would occur as it has over the past couple of years. Overall, it's about 76% of funders have now moved to a hybrid workplace model. This was a dramatic shift, a profound shift for our sector, and a couple of ancillary topics that we'll talk about in a few slides about how to support that dramatic shift. But as you can see here, 84% of private foundations, 73% of community foundations moving to a hybrid remote model, corporate grant makers at 100%. Again, that sample size is small for corporates, so take that with a grain of salt. But one thing that you'll note here is look at the green bar at the very far left. One of the key trends we found in these findings this year was that very small foundations are much more likely to go fully remote in their operations. I think this really opens up, this is one of the key trends we're predicting for this year. It opens up the opportunity for large private foundations with a great deal of extra space, physical space, to create hoteling options, co-working options for smaller foundations in their region, or smaller foundations who maybe want to come in for a quarterly meeting or an annual retreat, renting space from their larger private foundation peers. So I think that there's a bit of a marriage potential here between a bit of matchmaking between large privates with extra space and small foundations that have chosen to go fully remote. Now, there is some concern around how we support this new hybrid reality. And I think something to take home, perhaps to your organizations, is that it's not enough to just have the policy, but we also need to enable best practices in that workplace model. And so we have a bit of a red flag here that 36% of respondents are not changing the way that they provide training and learning in their organizations, even though they've gone hybrid. So I'd encourage you, if that's you, if the 36% is you, to take a look at some of the ideas on the left there and consider adding new ways for your team members to learn in this new hybrid reality. We're also seeing, a couple of shifts in terms of remote tool adoption. This slide looks a little busy, so let me highlight something simple. Pay attention to the yellow bars, highest on the left, and then pay attention to the white and blue bars, highest on the right. The ones on the left, the yellow ones, show small foundations adopting Calendly and Doodle and meeting planning tools at a higher rate than their large foundation peers. Big philanthropy may have more event assistants and assistants in general to do that work for a team member. There's no reason why those folks can't be put to higher use, perhaps more rewarding efforts for themselves and your organizations, and the large funders could adopt the use of some of those tools like their small funder peers. Conversely, we see large foundations much more likely to adopt tools like Slack, collaboration tools, online collaboration tools that enable you to really work differently and better in a more remote or hybrid fashion. So I'd encourage both ends of the spectrum to learn from each other and perhaps adopt tools from their peers to make this hybrid reality a little bit easier and more effective for people. Again, I have chat up and I'm monitoring. If you have any questions, you're welcome to go ahead and ask them. So moving next into a topic that we were all wondering when we asked this question late last year. Of the good stuff that we started doing in the pandemic to ease the burden on our nonprofit partners, of the good stuff that we started, how much of that are we continuing to do post-pandemic? So you can see here, the good news is we continue to do much of it, perhaps even deepening. In 2022, the orange bars, you can see that we are deepening our use of paperless payments. 36% of us are providing tech and TA to nonprofits. 51% of us are using streamlined reporting, 62% streamlining applications. So of these good things, we continue to deepen the use of them in working with our nonprofit partners. That's great. One area where we're backsliding, however, removing funding restrictions over on the left and auto-renewing grants. So we do see that funders have added back funding restrictions. A really important exception there are our family foundations. 62% of family foundations continue to remove funding restrictions. So if you're from a family foundation, pat yourself on the back. Share your approach with a peer at a private foundation, encourage them to do the same. This is that same question, but segmented by asset size. And there's an important reason why I'm segmenting that. One might think that as foundation asset size increases, you have the ability to do more of this good stuff for your nonprofit partners. However, for private foundations, we do not see that trend. From left to right, you'd expect that slope would go up. Instead, it goes down. And we see that at the far right, funders with over $1 billion in assets do less of almost everything than their smaller peers, with the exception of things like paperless payments. They're perhaps a little more likely to do paperless payments. But when it comes to using streamlined applications or reporting, the teal and the orange bars, A small foundation is much more likely to be streamlining than the biggest foundations in the world. This is disturbing news to me. This was a very challenging finding for me to sit with, especially in light of the fact that you can't say it's just a function of asset size, because when we segment this data for community foundations only, the slope is what you'd expect. Big community foundations do more of all this good stuff than their smaller community foundation peers. But that is not the case for big private foundations, and we don't know why. When I share this test, when we were chatting with the survey committee about this, some of our members said, well, could it be there are more bureaucratic layers in a big philanthropy? Could it be that there is different board composition in large private foundations, and the board is perhaps resistant to some of these changes? Could it be that community foundations have closer proximity to their nonprofits in the community, and therefore more likely to develop some of these practices? We don't know the answer. I'd love your idea if you have any ideas here, but we would love to see large foundations deepen some of these commitments. This segmentation will come up again. We see a similar trend, unfortunately, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. So we'll look at a similar pattern in just a few more slides. Moving right along, I'm going to talk about what we're seeing with security. So security breaches are a very common concern. It's not all that your IT peers do in your organizations, but we do see a growing concern around cybersecurity. At the same time, we had a very unusual trend happen over the past couple of years. We've been asking questions about breach rates since 2016. The breach rates were consistently going up for every type of foundation. And then the pandemic hit. Something about the remote work environment or something else, we don't know what it's correlated with, but across the board, the breach rate was cut in half for every type of foundation over the past 2 years. We don't know why. It's true, foundations are allocating more of their IT budget to security. They're also adopting stronger practices, which I'll share in a minute. But I suspect there's something about the remote work environment, perhaps tighter security or when using a VPN, for example. There's something behaviorally or technically different about the remote work environment that has changed the breach rate. Because at the same time as you see this, you saw in the news all sorts of articles about increasing numbers of hacks of the public sector, for example. So I don't know if bad actors switched sectors. We simply don't know the answer here. I suspect when we ask this question again next year, the breach rates will bump back up. So I want to dive a little more deeply on what best practices look like around security. This is one where if you don't have what's called multi-factor authentication in place, open up your email right now, start an email to your IT peer or your tech provider and ask them for what's called MFA, multi-factor authentication. It is the easiest thing to do to secure your organization. All we mean by that is the code you get when you log in to your bank account and they send you a code and you've got to, enter in the 4-digit code. That's what we mean by multi-factor authentication. 2 or 3 years ago, people hated it and they didn't know how to use it. Now they still hate it, but they all know how to use it. It's time for your organization to adopt MFA. If you haven't, open the email, send me an email and I will help you write it. I'm going to add my email right now to the chat. But this is the lowest cost way for you to strengthen your security posture. Other ideas here for you to take a peek at. If you're a small organization, take a look at what One Step Up is doing in terms of practices. So if you are under $25 million in assets and you see this orange bar about a firewall and you don't have one, but you can see that almost 70% of the next layer up, almost 80% of the next layer up has that security product. you should probably consider adopting it, especially if your benefactor is concerned with your asset security. So again, this is a slide that'll be in your packet. It's an easy one to study a bit more deeply if you are considering updates to your security approach. So with that, I'm going to pause and turn things over to Tess to talk a little bit about some of the staffing trends that we're seeing.
Chantal. And I actually like coming in off that slide because I had led our MFA effort at Hewlett after years of trying to get it done and facing a lot of resistance to it. And I'm happy to report that it went very smoothly. I don't think people even acknowledge that it's a pain anymore. So if anyone has questions about implementing it, please email me.
There is a test. There's a question right now in Q&A. I don't know if you want to answer that, if you can see it. It's about MFA being important.
I close my Q&A 1 second.
See if you've got it. I recognize MFA is important, but some of our staff struggle with it. Our cell phones are not paid for by the org, so maybe that's an HR issue.
Yes, we right. And there is privilege in my statement because we do have cell phones that were paid for by the organization. And we do have some employees who don't want foundation cell phones, and we gave them the choice between using foundation cell phone, between using their own cell phone, or even for all of our employees. We also had some more elderly employees who didn't have a smartphone. And so we gave them YubiKeys as well. And we just made sure we did like one-on-one training with them so that they knew how it worked and knew where to keep it and all of that. So I'm happy to talk more about that. I don't want to get too off staffing trends, but there were ways around that. I know we had spoken to other foundations at the time when we were planning our strategy for how they handled not having an easy way to do push notifications.
Tess, I'll add one coda to that and then we'll move into staffing. So it's a great question that you're asking. There are many ways to strengthen your security posture. MFA is simply the cheapest, right? It's one of the easiest ways and the lowest cost ways to implement a layer of security. If that is problematic for your folks, you can do things like endpoint detection system, right? Which is a much more sophisticated monitoring system of your entire network and all the touch points that it has with the public internet. So that's expensive. And hiring a firm to manage that and understand that can be more costly. So it's a cost benefit analysis. Do you invest in cell phones for everyone? Do you invest in capacity building training for people? Or do you invest in something like a firewall and an endpoint detection system, so on and so forth? All right. Thank you for that great deep dive, whomever asked that question. But Tess, I'm going to turn it back over to you for staffing.
All right. So looking at staffing trends, this is kind of a bigger section. We are going to look at changes in IT staffing ratios by organization type, by asset size. Chantal will jump back in to talk about who the person leading technology actually reports to. And then I'm going to get into our one qualitative question that we asked on the survey, which is really about what challenges organizations were finding in terms of retaining and recruiting IT talent. So to start us off, let's look at IT staffing by organization type. And this year, we actually saw that the ratio of technical to non-technical staff has overall improved, which is great news. After holding steady over the last two surveys, we saw a significant improvement in the average IT staffing ratio, with our respondents reporting that they had one IT person for every 12 staff members, which is an improvement from 2020 when they reported a 17-to-1 ratio. Community foundations had a 18-to-1 ratio, so double the staffing ratio of private foundations, which were 9-to-1. Public foundations had the highest ratio, just one IT person for every 28 staff members. This is not totally unexpected. This is actually kind of what we would expect to see here. We generally see that the smaller an organization's asset size, the greater its IT staffing ratio. Oh, and I think Chantal, you're actually jumping in on this one.
I think you just said it, right? There we go. Smaller asset size, higher ratio. It's worth noting. Recall that slide where we talked about crisis interventions and the fact that community foundations were a little more responsive. Big community foundations doing more of that good stuff for nonprofits. it's worth noting that they're doing all that with less IT staff. And so if you work at a community foundation, I'd like you to take a deep breath. I'd like you to take a vacation day. And I'd like you to thank your peer for being so responsive in spite of being overworked to your community partners. So Tess, I think that the story is pretty clear here on staffing ratios. I can go straight into reporting if you'd like.
Go for it. Thanks.
Good. So this is a really interesting trend. I don't know who we have in the room, which departments you're in, but there's an interesting anomaly in philanthropy around who IT reports to. I've only ever seen this in state and local government. So there's a bit of an artifact from the late 80s, 90s, when we didn't know what IT was, and maybe we thought it was a passing fad. And so we just kind of threw that department under the finance department. And many state and local governments still have that structure. Almost nobody else has that structure. In most other organizations, IT reports into a COO or directly into the CEO. But in philanthropy, we still have, a good 8% folks at the upper over $1 billion still reporting into a CFO. I'm starting to see a shift here, and foundations having technology report into the president or CEO, which is good if you're thinking about the role, tech's ability to scale your mission and really help reinvent your mission if it's tightly aligned with strategy. So just wanted to highlight, though, that we still have some stragglers here in reporting in through the CFO, which is somewhat of an anomalous model. And then Tess, back over to you, because you've got an interesting story here.
I do. Yeah. So this question kind of was framed around the Great Resignation and whether or not it was real for Philanthropy Tech. And so looking at staff turnover, we had a lot of organizations reporting a lot of staff departures in this year's survey, and they identified shared pain points related to retention as well that I'll get into in a moment. The survey results also captured an almost even offset of promotions occurring in these organizations. So in context, this could reflect a couple of different scenarios. Staff being promoted without having a replacement, and they take on the responsibilities of multiple roles. It could also mean that organizations are using promotions as a retention tactic. Corporate grant makers and public grant makers, public foundations did not follow this trend. They actually reported an average departure ratio and a significantly lower than average promotion ratio. Community foundations also had done a particularly good job of promoting from within, and they had the lowest number of departures amongst tech staff in this last year's survey.
That looks like it was probably a good place to spend the pandemic with your community foundation, right? They promoted you, they kept your job, they promoted you. Seems like it was a great role to keep.
Mm-hmm. Diving into on this next slide, this was our big qualitative question, which was, what do you think is the greatest challenge for retaining and recruiting IT talent? And we had responses to this question from every organization type, and across the board, we separated out the answers into 3 different buckets. One was competition. One was, retention issues around what the reality for Philanthropy Tech employees looks like. And then the last bucket was kind of what opportunities for growth and advancement these employees were seeing and how that affected retention. And so across the board, every single organization type reported that they were struggling to compete, especially against for-profit tech companies. They're struggling to compete on competitive salaries, other benefits like work from home benefits, flexibility, just kind of the whole gamut. They reported that they were having a really hard time finding the right fit for someone who has the right experience and who wants to work in philanthropy and who also has the attitude and aptitude for doing so. And very often what we were hearing was that organizations reported that they needed a generalist who could wear multiple hats, and they were just really struggling to find it. I know even now, even with I'm in the Bay Area, and even with all the layoffs that are happening out here, it can still be hard to find that fit because a lot of foundations are still on Windows Server, but the people who are being let go of Meta aren't trained on Windows Server, so even though there is this this influx of tech talent, it's not always matching what the foundations need.
TAG just had I'm going to add to that because you're right on. TAG held a peer forum with some of our executive members, our CIOs, CTOs a couple weeks ago. And I asked for an anecdotal update from what they're hearing around staffing, and exactly what you said. It is easier on the coast to source people right now, given the layoffs. But at the same time, it's harder to find those generalist roles that you're describing because it's not the state of the rest of the market. It's the state of the market in philanthropy, but it's not the state of the rest of the market, which has a greater degree of specialization in these roles, pays more as well. So what we're also seeing on the coast is recently laid off tech staff would rather wait it out for the private sector to come back so they can get a private sector salary than move into philanthropy tech. So this is anecdotal, but this is what we're hearing from our IT executives in philanthropy. In outside of the coast, we're hearing in North America anyway, that people are seeing a greater degree of availability, but that skills mismatch continues to be a struggle.
Yeah, and then looking at, once you have those employees, how do you retain those employees? This was a struggle kind of on the day-to-day reality front. And I feel like you could bucket a lot of what I'm about to say under like IT isn't given enough and then fill in the blank. So funding and headcount, there were reports of losing employees due to lack of IT funding, high burnout rates, employees are wearing too many hats. IT isn't given enough focus and priority. Employees are struggling with not having buy-in on the importance of prioritizing technology and security at their organization. IT isn't given enough respect. People were reporting that their employees just weren't treated very nicely at their organizations sometimes, and general attitudes toward IT. IT isn't given enough seats at the table. Employees were frustrated by what they saw as a organizational failure to integrate tech with the mission of the organizations. And then that last point about opportunities for growth and advancement, it all kind of mixes together, but organizations reported retention issues because they just simply couldn't provide growth opportunities. And more specifically in like a targeted way. This means not having career paths, not being, employees finding that they can't stay up to date with the latest tech. They don't have intentional skill development, or even more general job growth, really. So this was all qualitative. There was a lot there. It's I always say it's kind of like a sad section to end this section on, but we have some good news at the beginning of the next one. So we can jump into diversity, equity, and inclusion practices for tech teams.
Next slide test, or do you want to hang out here for a second?
No, this is good unless anyone has questions about it.
Yeah. We're monitoring chat, so if you do have questions, let us know. I know we're throwing a lot at you. Again, this will be in the deck, but it's 2023. And so the reality is that philanthropy is digital philanthropy. And so the role of technology is really at this point in time, a key determinant of our mission success. So we're really glad you're here with us and we're sharing what we know in the hopes that we can all improve together. But this next section is also very important to us as part of our mission at TAG is the strategic, innovative, and equitable use of technology in philanthropy. So we've been asking these questions for several years now, and we're happy to report on what we're seeing.
Yeah, so we asked questions related to diversity, equity, and inclusion to see how things like training rates, programs, policies may have changed, and to understand better the implications of those changes. So our dream is that as we're seeing efforts increase in those areas in a lot of sectors, we would also hope to see them in the nonprofit and philanthropic sectors. And the good news is that there was positive movement and more technology teams than ever are receiving DEI training. For example, here, the number of organizations offering no training whatsoever has decreased from 40% in 2018 to 21% in 2022. So that's my good news after my bad news. Looking at the next slide, we surveyed foundations on their DEI programs, and some key findings here were that 12% of foundations, just 12% of foundations, I'll say, are developing a pipeline of diverse leaders in technology. and just 18 provide targeted deployment opportunities for diverse employees in technology. But then when you segment these results by the type of organization, if we look at the next slide, I think Chantal is actually jumping in here. Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, I get to keep talking.
Keep going.
Yeah, you see there are some differences here, like private foundations are an outlier, that black bar, where 30% offer no DEI training to staff in technology related roles. And now Chantal is going to explore this a little bit further.
There's so much to sink into here.
There's so much.
As I was listening to on the previous slide, I actually wanted to connect the dots between your staffing exploration and what we see here. So friends, there's something really interesting to note here. When you look at the 35% that are recruiting diverse candidates, that's making us feel great. We're doing a better job compared to what we were doing in 2020, likely not enough. But here's where I have some concern. I have some concern that we are doing a little bit of a check the box approach to diversity and inclusion, because we are focused on recruiting. And once we get people in the door, only 18% of us are creating targeted development opportunities for diverse employees. Only 12% of us are developing a pipeline within our organizations of diverse leaders. So I think when it comes to what you saw earlier from Tess around staff retention and challenges there, I think this goes arm in arm. We can't just think about finding the right person and getting them in the door. We need to think about what their time in our organization looks like and how we can steward them to their highest potential as humans, right? And as contributors to our organization. So I can't, say with broad strokes that we have a check the box approach to inclusion and diversity in our sector. And when it comes to tech, but I ask this question: how well are we doing there? How can we do a better job of developing inclusion once we have our teams created? So I'm going to go back to the segmentation that we saw before. Private foundations by asset size. Same situation. You might expect that the luxury of larger assets deepens our commitment to this work, and you'd see that curve going up as your asset size goes up. That is not the case for private philanthropy, for private foundations. The largest private foundations do less of almost all of these things than their peers one step down at $500 million. The exception is, see that teal bar? What do the largest foundations care about most? Compliance, non-discrimination, and regulatory compliance. Their smaller size peers are doing more when it comes to anti-racism work, embracing differences in the workplace. Training for tech staff is decreased at the largest foundations. Again, we don't know why. Is there more siloing? Is there, as a result of that siloing, is there an increased perception that tech doesn't have anything to do with equity? It's behind the curtain, and so it doesn't matter, right? Is there a difference in the board's commitment to this work? We don't know. What I do know is community foundations, like last time, follow the curve of increasing commitment to this work as their asset size increases. In other words, big community foundations are doing more of all of this equity work for their tech staff than big private foundations. This is a challenging insight here, and we don't know what to do with it. If you have any insight from your own org, even if you'd like to share that anonymously with me, I would really love to learn more here, because I think we can do more work together. Tess, we've sat with this as a committee, and the data doesn't give us any correlation. So we're unable to make a determination here, but we wrestle with these findings.
We do. And yeah, I mean, even just anecdotally, I can sort of share that, I am at that large private foundation. And even on our team, it really took, Hewlett, I think, is doing an amazing job internally working on, every department is taking part in this now, but I joined a team that had been here for a really long time. Like the average tenure of my team is like 12 years or something. And it was very easy because you're kind of siloed to say like, well, that's like the program, like the programs do DEI stuff, like IT. And then all of a sudden you're like, no, you could change your policy. No, you could like work with different vendors. No, you could do this. You could do, and then all of a sudden people are like, oh my God, right. We didn't even realize that was DEI work, you know? But it really took like having a massive foundation realization that every team needs to be doing, not just our grant making work, like internally we have to be doing this. And that means admin teams too, to get, I think, the momentum for my team, for finance, you know, to really kind of step our game up too.
Thank you for sharing that reflection, Tess. I think it is, I'm sure there are peers on the call who can see themselves in your story as well. And I think that for folks who are with us from smaller foundations, you can see down here, $250 million, $25 million in asset size, 50% of those private foundations are doing none of the above for their organizations. So there's work to be done almost everywhere on this spectrum in terms of bringing ops staff and tech staff into our DEI work. Tess, our last area of the survey.
Last area. All right. The headline of our last area, if you could go to the next slide, please, is looking, you know, we asked about, you know, shifts in grants management systems. And the headline here is that Flux, Foundant, Salesforce, and Submittable were the four grants management systems that had the highest usage amongst our respondents. Flux was the leading choice for private foundations, Foundant the leading choice for community foundations, Giving Data the leading choice for family foundations, and Submittable was the leading choice for government grant makers. And if we could go to the next slide, please. There's a lot of information on this slide. You know, this again looks at GMS by organization type, and the full report has much more information, you know, all of this, but then information on other leading GMS and how adoptions have changed over the last few years. For example, you know, if you look at this, Smart, Simple, Blackbaud, and a few others are also common choices for varying types of grant makers. An important note on this slide is the use of a custom GMS has decreased significantly to just 5%. So Chantal, I'll steal your line, but what we typically say about this is that if your organization is convinced that they have to go with a custom GMS, please show them the slide and tell them not to, because not very many other organizations are at this point.
It's a function of, are you willing to change your business processes to fit an existing GMS? And the answer to this should be yes, right? Take a Smart Simple, take a Salesforce and customize it deeply rather than rolling your own from scratch. And that's what we're seeing at these outliers. Larger foundations might be using a system that they customize pretty extensively rather than starting from ground zero. So again, there's a lot here, but this will be in your packet. I encourage you to find your asset size. That's the strongest predictor of which GMS you will be using. And if you're looking to replace yours, look one layer up, look what your partner with slightly higher assets is doing and consider modeling that approach. For those of you who are community foundations, we have just a couple more slides left, but I wanted to include this one for community foundations because your tech stack is a little different. You've got a bunch of donor management activities and financial management requirements. So you can see right there in the middle, that white bar for mid-sized organizations tend to be going with a Foundant, kind of all-in-one. Foundant will serve multiple needs in your tool stack. And so we see community foundations moving increasingly toward Foundant. We also see communication foundations using Salesforce at the higher end for highly customized solutions, and at the lower end for kind of the 10 free nonprofit starter pack licenses. But right there in the middle, we're seeing a great deal of adoption of Foundant and some other tools, Grant Edge, Smart Simple, et cetera. Breezing through a couple of these slides again for community foundations, I wanted you to see donor portals in use for community foundations. Same trend as before. Donor portals right there in the middle. People are using Foundant for their out-of-the-box donor portal. And then at the large size, they're doing a highly customized experience, tending to be using Salesforce, Donor Central, so on and so forth. Again, this will be in your packet. So if you're making these choices, you can view that data here. Same thing with CRM. We are seeing an increasing number of foundations using, that's the orange bar, using their grants management system for their CRM. Using the CRM functionality in their GMS to handle those needs. Now, what if your contact is not a grantee? What if it's a fellow in your community? What if it's a keynote in your network? They're not a grantee. So if your grants management system doesn't support folks who are non-grantees, you have to be mindful that you may need a different kind of a CRM experience. And then lastly, we did ask questions around blockchain and Bitcoin. This was before the FTX meltdown. So I suspect that these answers have changed. There are probably not the same number of people investing in cryptocurrencies in this green bar here. Probably not as many people investing their assets in crypto. We do see for community foundations about 25% accepting donations in crypto. We know that you're getting out of it as quickly as you can as well. So you're accepting the donations and you're converting them to other assets and moving them into a more stable portfolio. Lastly, I think this might be our last slide. The technology budget as a percentage of your overall operating budget. This is an important one. It's the first time we've asked this question. And so what you'll see is that as your asset size increases, IT becomes more complex, your IT needs become more complex, and you tend to budget a bit more. These numbers are still pretty low. In other sectors, the allocation might be closer to 10%, or if it's a core lever, even for the mission or the bottom line of the organization, it could go as high as 20%. So in philanthropy, we do underspend on technology, and this is what the portfolio allocation looks like. So this is helpful for your IT lead if they're looking to plan ahead and think about what their budget should look like for the coming year. And so this is the flyover of some key findings from the State of Philanthropy Tech survey. We hope that this data helps you make better decisions for your organization. We hope that it helps you make the case for adequate staffing and budgeting, for increasing your DEI programs and training. We have been stewarding this work since 2007, not Tess and I personally, but TAG is the Tech Association of Grantmakers. And so we're delighted to continue to advance the innovative, strategic, and equitable role of tech in philanthropy. These are some things we're watching for the year to come. The need for responsible innovation. The rise of AI has us all wondering about the ethics of tech innovation right now. And I think that there's a role for philanthropy to help steward responsibly tools like AI in the social sector. We mentioned co-working spaces earlier. You saw the need for values like trust-based philanthropy, which we mentioned today, DEI work, to move from just conversation to actually implementing training and programs and really being operationalized. We did not talk a great deal about data and the increasing role of data in our sector, but TAG is launching a whole series on data strategy in May this year. We did not talk about customer experience, but there's work that we did last year as a whole series, which you're welcome to share. Philanthropy, you're welcome to review philanthropycx.org. A really great series trying to bring some of the practices of customer experience from higher ed and public sector into philanthropy so we can center on the nonprofit or grantee experience. And then lastly, community foundations did a lot with a little over the past several years. Lower staffing, lower budgeting, and yet higher commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and nonprofit supports through the pandemic. So there's a lot we can learn from our community foundation peers. And so with that, we are here for any questions you might have as we begin to wrap up. I'll leave my email in chat. If anybody has any questions you'd like to reach out about, you're welcome to email me, or you can ask any questions here that you might have.
Chantal, I'll highlight a question and then we have one in the Q&A. I've heard that transitioning CRMs and or accounting systems can be a huge hurdle. How can community foundations find more support and guidance for them making that transition?
Mm, any tool overhaul is incredibly time consuming and costly. There is no silver bullet to that question. I would hire a project manager. If you don't have one on staff, I'd hire a strong project manager to consultant to help you with that process. And TAG has some great resources, which Melissa, I can actually share in the follow-up email. We last year did a guide for integrated systems for community foundations, because the way your systems play together is a key for their success, right? The way data flows between them. So we have a whole guide for community foundations on how to select integrated systems with 3, I think actually maybe 5 case studies for orgs of various sizes and how they integrated their systems and what that process looked like. And then we have over 50 tool stack profiles for community foundations of different asset sizes. So small community foundation, what did you choose for accounting versus donor portal versus GMS versus scholarships? So learning from your peers is one of the best ways to make this choice, because your market for options is limited. Think about how big the market for community foundations is in the world. It's not huge. So the number of vendors who serve that market in a specialized fashion is somewhat limited. So our options are somewhat limited, but thoughtful planning, stakeholder stewardship, good oversight and engagement with the needs of your customers, making sure you've got real project management skills on staff or on contract to move through that process those would be my top tips.
Thank you so much. We have a question in the Q&A section.
Okay.
If there's any further information that cross-references staff size within asset size and available technology and staffing.
Yes, so we will share afterwards a link to the report from the State of Philanthropy Tech survey. For TAG members, we provide the raw data with anonymized, of course, but we provide the raw data file for anyone who wants to do their own analysis in a specific asset size by a specific foundation type. We do have charts prepared for all the full surveys exported with charts for foundations by asset size, community foundations by asset size, if you want to just see those charts at the ready. So that's available for TAG members. If your organization is a TAG member, I can make sure that you have access to that data. And then I do see, Melissa, another question that is along the same lines, segmentation. If we're a community foundation, the asset size of 25 to 250 million, or only 4 people, is there further work from a community foundation than the total number of staff that are managing the IT functions? So this is data that TAG has available for TAG members, right, from that survey. If you're asking what is the appropriate IT staff and budget for an org of your size, that's something I can't answer off the cuff here, but it's definitely the kind of conversation that happens in the TAG community. I mean, we're the Tech Association of Grantmakers, so this is where people hang out and discuss these sorts of questions regularly. I hope that this survey has provided you a little bit of a window, though, into practices for your org size and type. Tess, what did we miss? Anything else?
I don't think so.
Good. Well, folks, you're welcome to download these findings at the URL shown there. We'll send you a link afterwards as well. I know this was a lot of information. We really geeked out here, but I'm thrilled that we could share these findings with you so you can make better decisions in your organization. Reach out anytime. I shared my email in chat and it's also right here. And we look forward to seeing you at another webinar with the Council on Foundations. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all the attendees for joining us today. And thank you for our continued partnership with TAG to share this information and this updated data that is so vital to move our sector forward. As mentioned, the recording and resources will be shared afterwards, no more than a week out. And if you have any questions, like Chantal said, please reach out to our team. So thank you again. Hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your week.
Wonderful to be here.
Thanks.
Thank you all.